Authority of South Africa, ICASA, where she was responsible for a range of strategic, regulatory, and governance functions that include elections broadcasting, monitoring, community media broadcasting, sports broadcasting service regulations, cybersecurity regulations, alternative dispute resolution for consumers and telecommunications operators, strategy, compliance, and governance. Her areas of expertise are in corporate governance, media development, communications, content regulation, capacity development, consumer awareness, and advocacy. Palisa's experience and involvement in community-based structure range from national youth organization, university senate committees, and local government to public sector entities at large. As a PhD candidate under the research chair of critical architecture and planning at the University of Pretoria, she has written people's histories in context, perspectives on space and urban planning histories, and about South Africa's readiness for the fourth industrial revolution. She drafted a national rural tourism strategy, developed provincial economic and tourism initiative in the run-up to the FIFA 2020 World Cup, and was involved in a number of high-level public policy projects in media, content regulations, culture, and sports development. Palisa has served on a number of boards, including the Calabash Trust, a community tourism initiative in Nelson Mandela Bay, the Eastern Province Cricket Board, the Alliance France Management Board, Commonwealth Youth Advisory Board, Media Development and Diversity Agency Board, and on the National Heritage Council. She has served on National Council of Libraries and Information Services, the National Heritage Council Funding Committee, currently serves as a non-executive director for the National Housing and Finance Corporation, and as a council member of the Tshwane North TVET College. She's an advisory member of the Women in Technology in Africa, WIT Group, an initiative of the UN South-to-South Cooperation's Office, and a chairperson of the United Nations Group of Experts, Geographical Names, Dutch and German-speaking countries. Palisa continues to champion the development of regulations, governance, and women empowerment in the broadcasting and telecommunication. Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues and friends, join me in welcoming our sister Palisa to address us. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks, colleague. Thank you to the university for according me this opportunity. Also, thank you to Minister Mthethwa to appoint the first woman chairperson to take care of this responsibility, which I do not take lightly because this is my story too. I am a child, an African woman, and also all that I am comes from the soil which South Africa bears, fruits, leaders, and many other elements that makes us a better country. Colleagues and also to the listeners, especially to the student community, I think this is my first encounter with the university, and it remains so critical that today we try and find each other. We look at many elements of this responsibility. We look at the historical narratives, we look at the history itself, the process, we look at the lack of names and the nuance that is carried by the lack of names of women as well. mine is to give a broader perspective. Mine is not to impose. Mine is to advise. Mine is to guide. I always say that naming is about laying a claim to associate, a claim to provoke, to revoke, and to pursue an ideal for identification. But also, place naming is not different from space making, because we don't name places out of a vacuum. So we are creating spaces in this movement that we find ourselves in. I think let's also agree, because fortunately I'm currently a student. That is my preoccupation at the moment, and my full-time job. I'm a full-time PhD candidate, Prof. Macrenan, and I think that what keeps me going, and then also doing this work, because it feeds into how we want to transform South Africa. When we look at naming, at the naming and what it possesses, I've used quite a number of philosophers, of writers in this space, and also how then this calls for a powerful ideological tendency, which we see. Some contain dominant ideas, some contain dominant classes, political party, some form of association with what is currently a dominant ideology of certain parties. But this dominant ideology is dominant, yet it does not carry a flag. It remains a constant reminder that there were previous rulers in this land that we have. Power was once held, and power is held elsewhere at the moment, hence the call for change. I reside in Pretoria in Gauteng province, and it's called Pretoria, and also there's an element of Tshwane when I pay my bills, but also when I go to the shops, I find myself receiving a slip that is still written Verwoetsbeek. I noticed this in the past 3 years, and then I thought, when I was doing my recon, where's this place? Where did I buy? And it gave me a recollection that I always buy in the nearby places, and the banks are allowing this. How do we then still have an invoice or a receipt still return Verwoetsbeek total, or I just cannot recall the exact place. And this continues, it's being perpetuated, and you would align it to lack of change. So the ideology carries no flag, but yet it lives. There's truth about our places, about our names. Also, what we want as change is an act of transformation we would like to see. And it is a complex counterattack against colonialism, against oppression for others. And these are the responses we have been receiving throughout our engagements. Without dwelling too much on theories, we look at the dominance, we look at the iconism, which names always come out for national roads, for even places around our campuses or anywhere else. And we link this to capitalism, because we cannot alienate such without. I'm going to bring also an example here. We have come across many informal settlements. There's also a Department of Human Settlements in South Africa. And all of these are named, most of them are named after political icons. There's a Joe Slovo, there's there's a Ramaphosa there, there's a Winnie Mandela, and it continues. And there's repetition. You find them almost in every province or in every district. Repetition, people would put forward these names right at the insertion, right at the takeover of land. And then the formalization happens as a result. They take up those names in that form. But also, we have not come across an FW de Klerk, for instance, a squatter camp. Please, if anyone finds it, please give me a call. I would like to see that for record, because the nuance, the dominance that we have observed continues to be. But I'm not discounting the Bram Fischer in Johannesburg, in Soweto. But also, if we look rationally and using a political sensation, you find that yes, Bram Fischer, and it's understood who Bram Fischer was in the struggle. Therefore, he forms part of your Winnie Mandela's cohorts and O.R. Tambo squatter camps, which then becomes your RDP houses or formal housing in the latter parts of development. And that area has grown. So I was trying to look at contradiction, at separation, and how the naming convention are developed by the people who own the space, meaning they live in those spaces. I'm also looking at many other issues that refer to how then we proceed, especially in the university community. These are living spaces, and there are unassuming claims that are put place. Naming is very key, but also I understand you have institutions that are still named after alphabets. You have a main hall that is a main hall to some extent. I'm also relating to my alma mater, UWC, where it all started for me. You look at the construction of new buildings in our campuses, and what you find is that those who put their pockets as investors, they also want to finish it off by putting their names on there. It is not only in the plaque, but some of these investment understandings post-building, you find that these names do not carry an end of contract for many, and where a name will be used for the longest time. I mean, at UWC, where I was in the early 90s, we've had Liberty residence, and then it was beautiful, face break, fresh, and everyone wanted to live there. And when I applied, I was told it's for commerce, pharmacy, and dentistry students, and I'm just a mere political science and history major, and had no place in that residence. And as I continued, then I stayed at an old vintage residence named after a former student and a political leader, Cecil Esau. For me, it was prestige because that is where I found most of the student leaders when I came. It had beautiful, old, big rooms, but also that it was old and, you know, not modern in the making, said something that it's time to move on. But to some extent, all meetings of students were held in that space, and people will come in and will come out of these students' early hour meetings, early hours of the morning, 2 a.m., SASCO this, and all of the engagements. And you will find that also students had a name for that place, and they would refer to it as Shell House and Lutuli House, and created a nuance that this is where leaders stay. Therefore, you are correctly placed when you are there. And this continued to an extent where we also had Ruth First, which was a women's only residence. We also had the staff quarter, which was also named Qunu. I am Sesotho speaking, so my clicks are not as strong, Prof. Here. Qunu is the home of the late Nelson Mandela in the Eastern Cape. And all the nuances and when it's said and understood, it meant that people could associate and they wanted to be part of that. It also carried a form of exclusivity, because if you don't belong to a particular political student organization, you can't be found in that space. It created that alienation to some extent, that separation, and also classism between liberty race and other race that are not as modern looking in the setup that we lived in. So all of this then cannot be separated to how societies live, because the university community is an extension of our society. It is a space where those who have also form and become part of living with those who do not have. For instance, a student with a bursary, with a NAFSAS, and a student who's paid for by their parents, they integrate in this community. And therefore, whatever name is given or chosen then reflects and gives them some form of an identity within their own cohorts. What should be made clear is then the influence, as you embark in this process, the influence of naming and what money will bring, the power, the intervention, and who then gets to name. It's critical. We have the ones who will often bring, I don't know how the policies are set when investors come and they request a name if they build a building, definitely. But how then that becomes an alternative, and how long is that deal in setting up these buildings, your science building, and then the res and all your university infrastructure to that extent. So there are contradictions in this process. They need to be watched. They need to be looked after, because we want ownership. We want to lay a claim as a community. We continue then to look at role of place names and features in institutions of knowledge like universities. We continue to say that it's about placing your authority. We know that many of our cities, they've been named after colonial names. They were also claiming a name. They were claiming the space. They were saying we were here. And you look into that and say, this is not different that we had Durban, we heard Natal, we also have many in other provinces. And these are the institutions, this is the institution then that birth knowledge on how best we can preserve our history. I think I've also looked into what Prof. Mcebisi looks at. He confirms that the administrative process in all of this that we are doing and embarking on later on, I would say many institutions have moved rather very late in these institutions of higher learning in this process. I guess there were quite a lot of struggles to deal with. The fees were a priority, you would say. What Mkhetjana says that then when this all started, I mean, we had 1994, and then there was a gap in 1998, then there was a National Place Names Committee, which then changed into South African Geographical Names Council through the Act of Parliament. And that is 4 years later. And then in 2002, that's when the actual handbook of how to process this through guidelines was initiated. Then this looked at elimination of duplication of names in South Africa. It looked at rectifying orthographic errors that were there. It looked at according official recognition to place names commonly used by residents. It also looked at sensitizing toponyms to South Africa's democratic values and diverse history. And from what I have received from UKZN is this is the component which you want also to deal with. We found that provinces were also forward-looking, really. We cannot take that away from Limpopo province and Mpumalanga. It was right at the beginning of it all that they moved, quite fast in renaming their places. But what took me by surprise in recollection also as a scholar is that how universities never took up the lead in this movement, and how they delayed many. It's not only UKZN. I'm going to refer to Rhodes. I'm going to refer to University of Fort Hare. I'm going to also refer to UCT's renaming currently and UWC as well. Just for us to see that there's commonality and how we move, but there needs to be a process of guideline. We are very aware of legal challenges that take up there. We are also not assuming that there is a common identity for instance, for students. Students belong to different political associations. Even the unions in the institutions that are also quite diverse. It's not only how now you find that there's quite a number of interested parties in the process and who will come with their own, and how you find each other in naming these public spaces of your community. It needs firmness and a bold structure, but you don't do that without policy. You don't do that without guidelines. That is your backbone, and that is your protective measure. It's your what is it? PPE. It's what will make you go through courts. Hope not that you do that, or you'll be required to do that, because your processes will be looked at over and over. So it's very critical that Senate is aware of your prescripts and also endorses them and make them official, and that you pursue them with a fine-tooth comb so that you do not miss any step. We know the power of contestation. We know the freedom and then the liberty to oppose. It can come from a donor, it can come from a parent, it can come from a student, because your community is rather large, and we cannot assume that it's homogeneous. We also then, from what I've received, I've noted that there's a names bank. I think for me, from a history perspective, from an advocacy perspective, this is a very critical step that you have taken as an institution, such that we are able to document the before and after, that we create our own Timbuktu for the names, that we continue to endorse and embed knowledge in all that we do. So it will be really, appreciated if we continue and digitize this process. I'm saying this because South Africa is recognized by the United Nations. I sit in the working group of names expert of the UN representing the country, because I'm the chairperson of South Africa's Geographical Names Council. But also we are chairing the German and Dutch-speaking countries in that regard. I don't know how it came into that, but we are at that. Then all they do, these other countries whom we are part of the working group with, they have systems. Every move they take, it is recorded. And that is what an institution like UKZN should be doing, because you are generating knowledge and you are preserving history in this process. So I will not pretend that it is all well in this responsibility. It is a very different struggle. Others react differently to this discourse, the public reactions, the prioritization, the issues of whether this transformation is worth the force that we are putting, the enforcement, and also whether we have money to do this. It's always a case. But when a university, an institution like UKZN puts their name and said, we are equal to the task, we are going to look into this. And we are also going to honor women in the process. One is delighted to look into how this will unfold. We don't want to be looking at cultural prejudice, but also we know there's political expediency in all of this. I'm going to reflect on the University of Fort Hare. We've had a process. It was not how it was relayed in the media, because that we looked at a feature, which was a fort inside the University of Fort Hare premises. So the intention, or even the initial move, was never to change the name of the University of Fort Hare. The issue was the Fort Hare, which is inside. It is a heritage feature as well. We went to look at that. But also, if you look at progression, if then there was no longer a fort which is named after Hare, then possibly the questions would be, why is the university named University of Fort Hare if there is no Fort Hare? So some of those continued discussions might have led to what became of the intention, which is still being pursued by the Eastern Cape Provincial Geographical Names Council. But also in this experience of Fort Hare, no history is well put in terms of who was John, I think it's John Hare. Who was Hare in this? He was a military man. Some also in the, as historical facts, they refer to him as a serial murderer who dealt with the people of the region. And that history is not out there. And it is said that even when he lost the battle, he continued to put and named the fort after himself. So that is how the naming of the fort in Edigeni happened in Alice, former Alice. So it continues then to say these discussions, what do we have inside UKZN that is of colonial nature, that is not known or known, and how then does it shake and provoke others, and whether we want to look at it in the same particular way. But also from the Fort Hare experience, it is also not said that the land which the university is built on was donated by I understand, by Chief Charlie of that region. So there's quite a lot that does not come out from the process. Hence, we say research is critical as we propose new names. Research it forms part of the conclusion, because when we receive and when I preside over these names, I look at those factors with the entire council and we ask the questions from coordinates, whether this space can be found through maps, to its origin, the origin of the name. So there's quite a lot of work, and fortunately we're an institution where you can find African history embedded and can also be verified. But Fort Hare, University of Fort Hare remains a brand for many. Hence, then the survey, there was a survey to stakeholders. I spoke to Professor Buhlungu about this. He said, no, a survey was made, and all our alumni and many others in the community said, we want to retain the name. University of Fort Hare is what we know. This is an international brand, and we cannot take that away. We know presidents went to that institution. But as we proceed, we also look at how then, as we continue these processes and we comprehend, we put them into our socialization, we look at the collective indigenous history. Please let us not forget that. How then we want to preserve it, through which means and language. I like the fact that there's currently a linguist who is interpreting this session, but also pursuing how best we can use the languages we are associated with. I hear that there's a Swahili tonality in UKZN that is also coming through. So these are some of the exciting moments and express a form of readiness for the institution to take this up. We know that our people have so long been labeled as natives, which were assumed to lack history worth celebrating or preserving. And I say and maintain that this is an opportunity to undo that. This is one opportunity to really rediscover and put this. We've seen also through post offices, through administrative means, and how this for the longest time continued to suppress our indigenous memory. And having UKZN proceeding in this manner means that you are continuing to take your fighting sticks into the battlefield and proceed with this transformation agenda. Codifying names, also what we should not fall short in, because there is a confusion here that says that when we have names of places that sound like names that we have heard before, so sometimes they were changed to suit the English phonetic. Then when you change them from instance Umtata, M-T-A-T-A, to Umtata with an H, all of those. So these are some of the things issues we should be looking at. I'm looking at atrocities in buildings because a community, university community, also contains its own space. I don't know if you recall the Sanlam building, the notorious Sanlam building in the Eastern Cape in Gqeberha, former Port Elizabeth, where Steve Biko was tortured. Remember the association, it's called the Sanlam building and the name of Sanlam. I'm just posing here, Prof, and you know, and provoking minds as we continue. What association to an atrocity? Were the students killed in a particular site inside the institution? Was there brutality? Are there claims you want to put into that? I'm saying this as a former student as well. Also, cleansing happened at the Sanlam building for its renaming. So these are some of the socially conscious community will take up with you and say, we want to proceed in this manner. We've had KZN renaming of Kingsway Road in Amanzimtoti to Andrew Zondo Road. And we know how and what brought a debacle in that, how then others felt as victims in the process and others proceeded.
I'm sorry, we have 5 minutes now. We have gone beyond our scheduled time. Thank you.
All right. Okay, I'm almost towards 2 paragraphs away to conclusion. We've seen these names and how then the media So I'm looking at the pockets, the reactions, and what you will encounter in this journey. How the media then will proceed to say that, it's insensitive, the process, because Zondo bombed and killed 2 women and 3 children. And also what then from research, which is not out there, that there's an alternative narrative, which is said that it was 4 days after a bombing in Maseru that the South African Defense Force executed. So many of these come to face. Naming and gender, please look into this with a fine-tooth comb. I've seen quite a number of women in your executive, even hoping that we will find this balance. I get 16 names per quarter, let's say, that have gone through processes, and you'll find that it's only 3 names or even 2 that will contain names of women. Is it not a repetition of the past admirals of the past, your former settler narrative of carrying the names of the military, which all of them mainly were women, were men? It will become one few, like Port Elizabeth, someone who will remember their wife and say, call it Port Elizabeth, name it after my wife. So there is some form of thinking, recognition, and also not presiding on many other issues. UCT named Jameson Hall to Sarah Batman and Smarts Hall to Solomon Mahlangu. That's a recent feature. We also seen Rhodes refusing to rename the university, and 92% said we do not want any change of this name, which is the same with Fort Hare, University of Fort Hare. It says it's a waste of money, it's not a priority. We've seen Mandela University going after the name of the Nelson Mandela metropole in which they are based in. We've seen the new ones coming as Sol Plaatje University as a new institution. Chair, as I close, this is my closing part. That the task of memory is to reconstitute turbulence. It's going to come. It's also to look at fragmentation. And it's also a painful reminder of what we were and what we are. Based on my experience as a historian and as a South African Black woman and a mother of 2 daughters, there is no cost that can be attached to this transformation agenda. It is only through societal will and agency that we will see change. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. If we're live, we would applaud to this speech. It's very interesting and impactful to the topic under discussion today. And thank you very much for such a wonderful historical narrative of names and naming. And I can see that you are more concerned about women. And yes, I'm sure you'll be pleased to know that KwaZulu-Natal is referred as Mtania. So the whole province is named after a woman. So we respect our women in KwaZulu-Natal. Thank you very much. And also the policy of the University of KwaZulu-Natal is in place, and it informs how we should go ahead and name people. And one of the clauses within the policy is that in naming entities after persons, the general rule is that the living persons should not be named, considered, although expectations can be made to that rule under exceptional circumstances. So what happens if we name a building under Professor McCracken and McCracken's reputation goes down the drain, then we'll feel bad.
Highly likely
to change the name into Professor Ngubane. Thank you very much. I think without a waste of time, I will now invite Professor Donald McCracken, who's the Professor Emeritus of University of KwaZulu-Natal, to respond to your talk and give us a historical perspective as a historian. And we are grateful to have you, Prof, to take us through this session. Over to you, Prof. Prof was my dean, so I still respect him as my dean. Over to you.
I being the boss of Sihau Ngabani is a challenge, let me tell you that. He's completely lawless, completely lawless. Thank you, Prof. Ngabani. Ms. Caddy, I thought that was wonderful. I thought it was very thoughtful, and I thought it was clearly and evocatively brought out the essence of what is a very thorny issue. And I think it's important that we realize that first and foremost, that we are righting a wrong. I think there's a moral underpinning here. And you can talk and argue till the cows come home about Fort Hare, whether it should be this, that, or the other. The bottom line is that South Africa, and a lot of people do not realize this, because South Africa had a negotiated settlement, and it didn't plunge into civil war. I think a lot of people, especially in the white community, don't realize that there was a revolution and that we are living in a post-revolutionary situation. And in a post-revolutionary situation, there is change. Change is inevitable. And whether you like it or not, that's how it is. Now, from my accent, you can pick up that I'm an Irishman in Africa. And I'm very proud of that fact. About 10 years ago, I wrote an article in Critical Arts entitled Evacuators or Zealots, Post-Revolutionary Re-Imaging Colonial Languages, Names and Name Changes in Ireland and South Africa. Because Ireland, when it became independent in 1922, went through a very similar situation that South Africa is going in today. Now, sometimes no person is an island and no country is an island, but sometimes in the fervor of a post-revolutionary situation, we forget that other countries had very similar experiences and went through very similar things. And name changing is not merely a symbolic thing. It is something that underpins the whole ethos, the whole mentality of a nation. And it has to happen. And there will be mistakes. There's no question about that. And I can cite you mistakes. I will in a few minutes. but they are nitty, that's nitty picking. You know, it is not the fundamental of what has to happen in a country. Now, this takes several forms, and I obviously don't have to lecture you, Ms. Caddy, on this. There is a necessity to correct the spellings of some names, which through either usage or corruption or anglicization have changed. And that is a natural process. That is something that will, you find that in England, where old Anglo-Saxon names were formed into something, and old Roman names. Now, you don't have to change those. No one is going to suggest that London be renamed Londinium, which was its first name when the Romans were there. That is a process that happens anywhere, that people, through dialect, through laziness, sometimes through intention, will mispronounce a name, and that is always going to happen. The second thing is that actually changing an existing name, and that, of course, is the controversial aspect of it. And the third is new names for new things, new streets, new villages, what have you. Now, South Africa, I think, has done a pretty good job on its renaming, and it has been a massive undertaking. By 2010, now that's a long time ago, by 2010, we are told that 850 residential areas, natural phenomena had their change. Now that excludes the hundreds of streets that were renamed in various towns. And when I wrote my article, what interested me was the differentiation between different towns. Durban had changed over 100 street names. Pietermaritzburg had changed 18 street names. So you'll find, and there are circumstances that will dictate this, that in some areas it'll be more than in other areas. Of course, one has to be careful. There are pitfalls. One has to avoid triumphalism. One has to avoid sectionalism. And that is why you have to have a process. You have to have regulations. You cannot just say, I'm going to do this because I don't like the word Durban. I don't like the fact that Durban, and anyway, he spelled his name D''U. I don't like the fact Durban never came to Durban. You know, I don't like it because it's colonial. That's not good enough. There has to be an underpinning to the whole process. And I think South Africa was very good in that process. Also, I think it's very important that one does not look at this as an airbrushing exercise of a destruction of history. It is a cleansing. It is a cleansing exercise, but it must be a positive cleansing exercise. It cannot be done in a spirit of vindictiveness. And that is why people have to have their say, and they have to have their rants and what have you, even if that means at the end of it, it's the name change still goes ahead. I sometimes think that, well, by the very nature of it in a post-revolutionary situation, sometimes things are done hastily. There are mistakes made. There are inappropriate decisions made. In your talk, which I was reading last night, you talked about the controversy of a Point Road in Durban. You know, there had been a red light district. Was it appropriate that a red light district should be named after Mahatma Gandhi? And I would tend to agree with the opposition there, although strangely enough, perhaps for other reasons. During the Second World War, Point Road was known by many Allied troops who stopped off in Durban on their way to fight fascism. And it was the oldest road in the town. And the name itself, of course, meant, you know, pointed out to the point of the harbor. It had no sort of political or personal connotations. So if I'd been on the committee, I'd have said, no, leave that one. And another one was, one of the issues when you change road names is that you inevitably will change the main thoroughfares, but you'll leave the side streets. So you can have a situation where you've got a fairly, in the context of their own age, enlightened individual whose name is changed. And then you'll have some dreadful right-wing, you know, racist councillor who had a side street named after him, and blow me down, his name will still be there. You know, and that's inevitable. I don't know what you can really do about it. I have to say I was very sorry that Joe Cato, they changed his name because, you know, he ran a hardware store in Durban in the 1830s, 1840s, and did an awful lot for Durban. But that is a cost you have to pay in this exercise. The interesting thing about name change is that it is not permanent. And I was just thinking, I got an email last night from a Russian historian about a seminar, and I was just thinking about Russia and how that the names that the communists in 1917 during the 1920s were renaming their cities have now been renamed backwards. You know, circumstance, political reality will dictate that what you do today you cannot dictate for tomorrow. You know, St. Petersburg became Leningrad. Blow me down, who would ever think that St. Petersburg would be back again? Stalingrad is Volgograd. but even Volgograd was, you know, Stalingrad had an older name to it. So name reversal can and does take place. So if we could get in a time machine and go 100 years from now, you would be surprised at what names, you know, exist and what names have been changed. The overwhelming amount of name change in a post-revolutionary situation will take place in the generation immediately afterwards. And it will have different processes. For instance, in Dublin, when they changed the names, they said that they could only change the name of a street if the ratepayers in that street agreed to it. Now, in South Africa, in the white suburbs, you'd have no name change if you did that. So, you know, that doesn't work. But it depends on the circumstances and the age and what you have in it. An interesting thing about Durban is that there's an old book, probably the oldest book that talks about Durban. It was published by a missionary called Gardner, and Gardner Street was changed. Now, I would have left Gardner Street because he founded the first black school in Southeast Africa, in Durban, Captain Alan Gardner. And he eventually actually died of starvation in South America. Anyway, he published a book called A Narrative of a Journey to the Zulu Country, Zulu spelled Z-O-O-L-U, in 1835. And in that book, and I took a photocopy of it here, I don't suppose you can see it, there's a map of Durban, central Durban, and the street names are Adderley Street, William Street, Wellington Street, King Street. Those are the main streets. None of them survived. I mean, you look back at the names of Durban streets 20 years ago. There was West Street, there was Smith Street, there was Allowell Street, there was Gardner Street, and none of those names. So even in a colonial setup, there are name changes. You know, it is not something that has to happen because there is a change of political dispensation. And you know, and who knows what will happen again. Now, our university, and I have to pay tribute to Norma Zondo for the sterling work that she's done and her committee has done. I sat on it for a number of years, and I thought she carried it off in a very professional and sensitive fashion. In our university, I think she is right that we are ahead of the track when it comes to transformation. And I mean, I actually don't understand Rhodes. I lectured at Rhodes for a while, and Fort Hare why they wouldn't change the names, especially Rhodes, who really, you know, even if you're an arch imperialist, you don't like Cecil Rhodes. I mean, he was a nasty piece of work, and he was a nasty man. It's sometimes in history you've had this amazing situations where nasty people, unpleasant people, people that would be rude to you in the street, do great things, and pleasant people can do nasty things. You know, their personality and political, allegiance don't necessarily walk hand in foot. Well, let me tell you, Cecil Rhodes is a nasty piece of work. So anyway, be that as it may, I think we are ahead of the track. But you're quite right when you say that we have got unnamed buildings like, you know, L Block, the library, M Block, H Block. You know, it's meaningless. It's like me in Durban. I live in 10th Avenue. Why on earth could they not give me a decent name for my street? You know, I could be anywhere. It's soulless. It's impersonal. It has nothing to do with Africa. It's all, you know, I don't know. And there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 avenues. I think in Johannesburg, you've got the same. You know, all this very well, changing this, that, and the other. Give us a proper name for our street. Well, similarly with these buildings, and they have recently been changing the names, and I think the policy is a fairly sensible one. The problem is that, and the name bank is a good idea because you sit around at board table and people are sort of thinking, oh, who can we name it after? What about old, you know, Fred Smith or Joe Kamalo or whatever it is. And that's a dangerous way of doing it. There has to be thought, you have to have input. It has to be something that that has a meaning to whatever it is. If, for instance, if there's a history building, you would want to try and find someone who, you know, maybe was an African historian or something like that that you would do. The problem is when you come to name change. Now look at Howard College. The very name Howard College itself is problematic, and that's for the campus. On the campus itself, one has got the Malherbe Library, named after a vice chancellor. Howard College, named after a young lad of 18 who was killed in the First World War and whose father gave the money to erect the building. And that's where we came to what you were saying in your talk about the issue of the donor demanding their name. And of course, it's a catch-22 because no name, no money, you know, and what do you do about that? You know, and then it gets complicated, like, you know, with the curry cup, they put the firm behind, you know, the Coca-Cola curry cup or whatever it might be. It becomes, you know, it's too highfalutin. That is a problem. The Shepstone building, named after the chancellor, not after Theophilus Shepstone, but after the chancellor of the university, Francis Stock, the registrar of the university. The Centenary building, after the naming of Durban as a town because it was Port Natal before it became Durban, before it became Equatoria, in 1836. The Vice-Chancellor's residence, well, as I've never been invited to the Vice-Chancellor's residence in 40 years in the university, I don't know what it's called. Desmond Clarence building, he was a Vice-Chancellor. The Rick Turner building, now that's the only one where there's a modern echo, a modern nuance to it. What do you do with MTB, Memorial Tower building, after the fallen in 2 world wars? What do you do with it? You try to rename any of those and the hounds of hell would be down on your shoulders. And yet, can you have a situation where 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of the main buildings, 7 of the 8 of the main buildings hark back to a previous age and dispensation? And I think they're going to have to take the bull by the horns on this. But more important than that, I think that the university has to change the names of its, or at least of 4 of its campuses. They are geographically named: Westville, well, most of them are Edgewood, Pietermaritzburg. Howard College, of course, is a building and a campus. And I see Professor Ngabane telling his old boss to shut up. And Professor Ngabane will know that the site of Howard College was where Shaka had a lookout, and there's a ready-made name there. So, yeah, I mean, I think this is something that is topical. I think it is something that is necessary to be done nationally and institutionally. And I think down the track, it will make South Africa a better place. Thank you. Over to you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Donald. I can see that people are anxious to ask questions, but thank you for your response. And it is now becoming a heated debate, because when you name an entity, you name an entity in honor and in remembrance of that person for his or her contribution. So the problem lies when you change the existing names due to political nuances. So I just want to remind colleagues that if you have a question, just press the button under question and answer, and our guest speaker and the panel will respond to your question. I'll just go quickly and read the first one from Obaba Mkondisi Mthembu. Ubuza ukuthi, to whom do we submit proposed name of the unnamed structures? And the answer is that you direct your proposed name to corporate relations under the leadership of Noma Zondo. And Sonwabiso says, when are we going to start talking? We are now talking. Can you come up with your question, Sonwabiso? You are ready. And one dilemma Joes also want to contribute. I just want to invite you to start contributing. In the meantime, whilst we're waiting for people to comment, maybe you would like to comment, Palisa, on what Donald McCracken has raised, just briefly.
I'll be brief. He is cautioning against triumphalism, but confirming the assurance that is given by regulations. Regulations are your guidelines. In this purpose are your policies. This gets taken to court when there's a contestation. And I'm happy that then it goes through your Senate and then can also be checked. It's also good that we are able to know that the process, we don't wake up and come up with names, and that the council, we do not have a legal or a right to look at the university names, but we are advising in this fashion because it is the prerogative of council together with the minister responsible for education. Then that can lead into that. It is your universities are still called almost private institutions to some extent, because they continue to make their own rules. So I think for me, I am happy that there's a process that informs this intention and that we found each other. I don't know whether it also helps then that when we look at these dialects, we change of names, corrupted names, there's quite a lot. I heard that Tongat is also one of those corrupted names. It was not meant to be Tongat. It's named, please confirm, Tongati, Ulu Tongati. I think there's some resemblance there that we've found. Even Amanzimtoti, it was not meant to be Amanzimtoti. It also had cultural insinuations on that.
We have Wandile who is unmuted. Wandile, please ask your question.
Okay, thank you very much for the platform. We've been waiting for a long time. But again, thank you for the opportunity. And we'd also like to thank the speakers for the brief history lesson. So my question at this point in time is, in 2019, it was agreed upon, it was announced, I think, through the university communique. I'm just failing to remember which department it was, that the library at UKZN Westville campus was to be renamed after Umama Winnie Madikizela Mandela. So for the stakeholders who are here, I'd just like to pose a question with regards to what happened with regards to the naming of that building. And also, if instead we're going to be speaking on the renaming of buildings, especially the library at Westville campus. At Westville campus, we also have a documentation center. It's called Gandhi Luthuli Documentation Center, whereby historic files are kept of those said people. And with regards to Mahatma Gandhi, yeah, we have contributions because we don't want that name. His history and also like the significance of that person is not something that we as Black people we appreciate, or it's not a legacy that we want to see continuing. So I would just like to pose a question, because on the proposed buildings, it's just unnamed buildings. So I'd also like to speak with regards to the named buildings, because that said documentation center, we can go as far as all those documents which seek to perpetuate and also keep the historic documents in relation to Mahatma Gandhi. We want those things burned. We don't want them in our institution, because we believe firmly that that Documentation Center, we will continue to honor Albert Luthuli, because that documentation center, since it includes Mahatma Gandhi, who was an anti-Black racist, who was complicit in the British Empire's colonial actions in Africa. So with that being said, I'd just like to get clarity with regards to what channels are we then going to be using in ensuring that we don't have those colonial and anti-Black historic sites at this institution, because it shouldn't just be like the unnamed buildings. And also we have submissions for the other buildings also that are unnamed. So I think like this process is taking too long, and we've not gotten clarity with regards to how it's going to go about. And once we get clarity on that, we'd like to make our submissions. Thank you very much, Speak.
Yeah, no, Siyabonga Wandile. I think I'll direct this question to Pegani or Noma Zondo to give you some clarity.
Thank you, Professor Ngubane. Thank you, Wandile, for the questions. First of all, the library, the Westville Library was approved, but you'll remember that we only just got back to physical events, so the launch is still going to happen. So we once the name has been approved and then the family has given us the blessings, then we go ahead with the naming of the building, which also involves obviously the launch ceremony, naming ceremony that has to take place physically on campus. So that process is still going to take place. As you know, that everything has been happening virtually. I mean, even this lecture, this webinar, we're having it virtually because of COVID-19. So once everything is actually in place for us to go ahead with the launch, it will be announced to the university community. So that's the process that we're going to follow. On the other question that you raised regarding the unnamed and renaming, so our process, as we always stated, that we will want, since we have a lot of buildings that are unnamed, so we'll rather start the buildings that are unnamed. So we rather start our process by naming those buildings before we can actually get into renaming buildings and so on. So that's the process that we are following as per the naming committee prescription. So you have to be patient with us. So we rather work systematically to actually name all our unnamed buildings before we move into the process of renaming, because that's a very involved process and requires a lot of consultation, and also there are also legal aspects that needs to be taken into consideration. So we are aware that there is a call for renaming some of our buildings and spaces. So we haven't really ignored that. We are working on it in the background, but we do need to consult the relevant authorities and so on before that process take place. Thank you so much. I hope I've answered all the questions.
Yes, thank you very much, Norma. Do we have another fresh question? There is one from Thokozani Mkhize. I assume that the name would come with its relevant background and significance. Please confirm. I do confirm it does come with a relevant background and also a motivation. Before a name can be approved, there must be a motivation towards the suggested name. Any other question?
We have Kondisi Mtembu. Please ask your question.
Mvelasi. Mvelasi, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity and for the address from Chairperson Palisa. Thank you very much. So mine here is a question which seeks also to extend this naming of buildings and unnamed structures to an extent that on our campuses we see paintings of people who are maybe former liberation heroes and heroines. So when the chairperson was addressing, she mentioned something that she has never had a name, a building or a place named de Klerk. So, and when the other professor commented, he said that in South Africa, there has been a revolution, and after revolution, there is change. So, for example, in UKZN Westville campus, we're having a painting there by Governing Mbeki, which has a Mr. de Klerk there. So that painting, we're saying that the president, Mr. de Klerk, the former president, is the president who presided over the apartheid regime, which suppressed and the Black people and also was a racist in approach. So how do we then contribute into saying that even the paintings, even the structures of the university must erase the memories of people who have been presiding over racist, as Wandile Machozi has mentioned, the one of Mahatma Gandhi. So how do we go about the process, or is it the same process with which says we are going through the corporate relations officer? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vilase. I think this debate can also be extended to statues around our campuses, but I will allow Palisa to respond.
Thank you to Tembo and Majosi. I think when Majosi opened, he said, thank you for a historical lesson. It's historical and administratively. It is an historical and administrative process. So you are right, it should be this way, and there's no two ways about it. The administrative portion is what it is embedded in the process. So it means that when one wants to take action, then one should be very aware or require assistance in that regards. We also look into I think the insinuation, what the statement made by Majosi, I think, Prof. Ngubane, it's what we get all the time. So for me, I'm familiar. We as Black people don't like, in this instance, the name of Gandhi, and then he continues to substantiate his statement. But if there's a class action, a consent group, or a political party, he must name it. Because Black people are not homogeneous. I think we need to look into that because there's no assumption that he's talking for everyone, even if he was raising a different name. So we need to be careful when positioning our counter arguments so that we are firm and intentional and also operational, because we want to know who is against this. It cannot be that we say all Black people. I think I needed to rectify that so that there's a broader understanding on the tact of dealing with these issues. Which one have I not answered now? The part of the artwork and the visual. It's a university prerogative to look into that and how you put up and put down. In UNISA, for instance, there's Professor Pichana and all the other rectors that are there. You find that in UCT, you find that and some of them were responsible for not registering students because they were too poor, and in many instances, so you need to position that in a manner that is aligned to your statutes that are in the university. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think there is a long way to go. We still have to name our province. Our province has got a name in the surname, KwaZulu-Natal. And when we struggle to find a name for this institution after the merger of UTW and UN, we had so many complex submissions, some people just naming an academic institution by other unexpected names. We were so much surprised by the suggestions, but the process of naming is lifelong. But I just want to give you 2 seconds, just your closing remarks, Prof. McCracken, and then Palisa, just your closing remarks.
Well, I think that it's been a constructive meeting. I think that the few questions that we have highlight the emotions that people have surrounding the whole question of name changing. I may say I would not wish to chair the committee, the national committee, that had to deal with the people, from all sides sending the, comments and fervent disputes about the name change. You're absolutely right, Prof. Ngubane, about the name of the province. I think that does need looking at. It was a temporary conciliatory act at the time, but I still think that we need to be maybe a little bit more adventurous when it comes to our campus names. But I've enjoyed immensely taking part in this. Thank you for inviting me.
You're welcome, Prof. Palisa.
It is the duty of social institutions that we continue to promote and make aware of the economic and social benefits of standardization of names, but also that when we relate to them, we should not only think that there will be common names loved by all. I always reflect at how we come with contestations from areas which we would not have thought. But also I'm happy some of the questions were coming from younger people here, that they will continue to preside over these matters, both in their university community and outside, because it does not end there. You are not going to be students forever, and that you will find new institutions, new residences and many others. We want to see young people coming through, and fortunately, institutions now are still housing the young intelligentsia. And we trust that they will be able to carry through this responsibility with the dignity it deserves. Thank you very much. Transformation, it has no cost and there is no price for it. Thank you.
Very true, very true. Thank you very much for the brilliant thought that you have left us with. We have come to the end of our webinar. I will now invite Dr. Kuku Mazibuko, who's a senior lecturer in the School of Arts and the cluster leader for African languages. Over to you, Dr. Prof. Mazibuko.
Good day, colleagues, program director, our keynote speaker, Ms. Zondo, Executive Director, Corporate Relations, distinguished guests. This webinar today, on the third day of Women's Month, came at the right time, delivered by a phenomenal woman and the first woman to be the chairperson of the South African Geographical Names Council, Ms. Palisa Kati. Thank you very much. It is not only befitting the need to relook at the living heritage of the institution, but it is also aligned to the key priorities of the university that is driving transformation. The need to prioritize naming and renaming cannot be overstated. It is one way of preserving identity, history, as well as heritage. Ms. Kadi's lecture is a timeless wake-up call to intensive discourse as well as action in the naming at UKZN. We hope this will promote social cohesion, and diversity. Once again, really boga Mekati for handling such a sensitive issue in such an eye-opening manner. You said research is critical in naming and renaming. I just want to thank our program director for directing this very sensitive and very important webinar. Prof. McCracken, thank you very much for such a rich response. Prof. Ngubane, you will agree with me when I say we will have to invite Prof. McCracken in our onomastics classes.
Definitely.
Yes, Mr. Manyoni, our simultaneous interpreter, thank you very much for interpreting this webinar so that it is available in the languages of the institution. Shakila, thank you with corporate relations team for arranging and also for making sure that everything goes well together with the ICS team for support. University community, thank you for attending. Alumni, I can see that we were also joined by KwaZulu-Natal Provincial Geographical Names Committee. Thank you very much for honoring this invitation. Distinguished guests, staff, students, thank you very much. Siyabonga kakhulu.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mazibuko. Mine is to say asante, and thank you to everyone, and goodbye. Tatenda.
Thank you all so much. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for facilitating, and thanks to our esteemed guests. We really appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Noma.